Before she held you, she held her own dreams, some fulfilled, some shattered. And before she was capable of forming thoughts about you, your needs, your beauty, your voice, she was living in a world that shaped her far more powerfully than she could ever shape you. We forget this. We look at our mothers as the origin, as the beginning of our story, but we rarely ask what came before. What formed her hands before they ever cradled us? What cracked her voice before it ever called our name? What ghosts already lived in her bones before she passed anything down to us? Many of us walk around with invisible bruises from childhood. We say, she never showed up for me emotionally. She was always so critical. She made me feel small, ashamed, not enough. And when we speak this, it is not an exaggeration. The wound is real. The pain is valid. But the question is not whether we were wounded. The question is whether we are willing to understand what wounded her. Because until we do, we cannot truly heal. We can only reenact, repress, or repeat. Your mother did not begin with you. She was shaped by forces long before you were even imagined. And unless we are willing to trace those forces, to face them, we will spend our lives fighting shadows, hers, and now our own. Her parents, her culture, her era, her fears. These weren't just influences, they were architects of her emotional capacity. If she was never nurtured, how would she know how to nurture? If she was taught to endure instead of express, how could she hold space for your feelings? If she was punished for wanting more out of life, more joy, more rest, more love, how could she allow you to desire freely? Imagine a woman named Alina. She was born into a war-torn country where affection was a luxury, not a language. Her parents survived by suppressing emotion, by focusing only on survival. She never heard the words, "I love you." Her mother never touched her with tenderness. Instead, love was measured in food on the table, a roof overhead, in silence in times of distress. Alina grew up, left that world, moved to a quieter place, had a daughter of her own. She gave her daughter everything she didn't have: warm clothes, proper education, even a piano. But something was missing, something her daughter felt every day but could never name. It was the emotional hunger that came from having a mother who was physically present but emotionally unreachable. That daughter sat in therapy years later saying, "Why couldn't she love me?" The therapist asked, "What makes you think she didn't?" She replied, "She never hugged me. She never said she was proud. I felt like I was invisible." And in that moment, something subtle but powerful opened up. Not the justification of pain, but the beginning of understanding. Because the truth was not that Alina didn't love. It was that she didn't know how to love in the way her daughter needed. She had never been taught the language of emotion. She had never known the safety of being held while crying. She had never been told that feelings weren't weakness, but wisdom. So she did what many mothers do. She gave what she could and withheld what she didn't know she was withholding. You see, the tragedy is not always abuse. Often, it's absence. Not the kind we could name like a missing parent, but the invisible absences, the empty spaces and conversations that should have gone deeper, the hugs that never came, the words of affirmation never spoken, the shame that was passed down without either of you realizing. What we don't often realize is that we become the container for our mother's unlived life. We carry the grief she never expressed, the creativity she repressed, the anger she swallowed to keep the peace, and we mistake this inheritance for our identity. Many people live their entire lives trying to earn the love of a mother who never learned how to give it, not because she was cruel, but because she was wounded. But wounds don't vanish simply because someone becomes a parent. Parenting doesn't heal trauma. If anything, it exposes it. And what is not healed is handed down, not as an intention, but as a pattern. When we begin to humanize our mothers, the story changes. Not into one of denial. We do not erase what happened, but we begin to see that her limitations were not personal attacks. They were echoes of her own suffering. We are so often the first generation to even speak of these things out loud, to name the voids, to say something was missing without being told we're ungrateful. Sometimes save a board to know where we burn, where we cry, but with this awareness comes a responsibility, not to fix our mothers, but to understand them, and in doing so, to free ourselves. Because as long as we believe that our worth was diminished by her inability to love fully, we will continue searching for that missing love in places that will never give it, in partners, in perfection, in performance. But the moment we understand that her love was filtered through the lens of her own pain, we stop seeking and start seeing. And this is what I want to emphasize in this segment. I feel the love coming from my father's passing, and it seems to me like more than any other setting in the world, we stop seeking, and in seeing clearly, we begin to grieve not just what we didn't get, but what she never got. This grief is sacred. It is not weakness. It is the cracking open of generational silence. And through that crack, something ancient and powerful begins to bloom. Compassion. Not pity, not forced forgiveness, but a fierce, grounded compassion that says, I see now. I see the girl inside the woman who raised me. I see the ways she struggled. I see how that struggle touched me. And I choose to end the cycle, not through blame, but through awareness. To humanize your mother is to reclaim your own humanity. Because when you realize she was not a goddess or a villain, just a woman doing what she could with what she had, you begin to release the story that her limits defined your value. And the reason the stories are so powerful is because they finally release the story that her limits defined your value. And in that moment, you are no longer a child seeking approval. You become a witness, a truth teller, a healer of the lineage. And that is where the real healing begins. Some of the deepest scars are wrapped in warmth, not in violence, not in abandonment, but in the gentle suffocation of a smile that asked for your silence, in the perfectly packed lunch that came with an unspoken expectation, in the praise that rewarded you for being quiet, obedient, pleasing, never wild, never angry, never full of yourself. It is easy to recognize trauma when it is loud, when it shouts, strikes, storms out, but what of the trauma that whispers, that wraps itself in kindness, that sings lullabies while it slowly teaches you to ignore your own voice? Many of us were raised by mothers who were outwardly kind, consistent, generous in the ways the world recognizes as good parenting. They stayed, they worked hard, they took care of us, they showed up to the school plays, they told us to comb our hair, sit nicely, smile for the camera. And in many ways we were lucky. But there's another story that lives beneath that surface, one that is harder to speak of because it's coated in gratitude, guilt, and confusion. You may say, my mother was always there. She made my favorite meals. She listened when I cried. She was good to me. And yet, deep down, there's a restlessness you cannot explain, a hollow you cannot name. You feel like you've lived your entire life inside a role someone else wrote for you. Because sometimes love comes with conditions too subtle to see. Conditions that say, I'll love you as long as you don't make me uncomfortable, as long as you don't challenge me, as long as you don't become someone I don't recognize. And so you learn, not through punishment, but through tone, through body language, through the quiet withdrawal of warmth, how to stay acceptable. You learn to read a room before you read yourself. You become skilled at managing other people's emotions before you've even identified your own. This is the subtle mother wound. It does not scream, it whispers. It teaches you to suppress parts of yourself for the sake of peace. It tells you that your worth is tied to your ability to make others comfortable. It encourages performance over presence, harmony over honesty, compliance over wholeness. You may think, but that's just being polite. That's how love works. Give and take. And yes, relationships require compromise. But there's a difference between choosing to give and never learning it's okay to withhold, between expressing care and erasing yourself. Take Maya, a successful corporate executive. On paper, she has it all: a powerful career, a loving partner, a well-decorated home, but something inside her always feels brittle. She says yes to every request. She is dependable, responsible, and utterly exhausted. In therapy, her therapist asked a simple question: when was the last time you disappointed someone and survived it? Maya begins to cry. She cannot remember. She realizes she's built her entire life around being good, not because she wants to, but because she was taught early on that disappointing her mother was dangerous, not physically, but emotionally. Her mother needed harmony, needed Maya to reflect a certain image back to her: calm, well-behaved, polite, the perfect daughter. Any deviation, any expression of anger, independence, disagreement was met with a subtle withdrawal, a cold glance, a sigh, a statement like, "I don't know what I did to deserve this behavior from you." And so Maya learned to disappear, not from the room, but from herself. She smiled when she wanted to scream. She apologized when she had done nothing wrong. She cared for others while quietly neglecting her own soul. This is not a story unique to Maya. It's a story lived by millions, daughters especially, who were molded, not abused, who were polished into reflections, not seen as whole beings. And this kind of wound is harder to face because there's no obvious villain. There's love in the story, real love, but it came at a price, the price of authenticity. Until you confront these silent contracts, the ones that say, "Be who I need you to be, not who you are," you will keep betraying yourself. You will keep saying yes when every cell in your body says no. You will keep entering relationships where you are loved for your usefulness, not your truth. You will find yourself attracted to people who need you, not people who see you. Why? Because the mother wound taught you that being needed is the same as being loved, that sacrificing yourself is the path to approval, that peace always means keeping others happy, even if it costs you your voice, your vitality, your freedom. But peace, bought with self-erasure, is not peace. It is a cage made of compliments, and until you notice the bars, you'll call it love. To begin healing, you must allow yourself to disappoint. You must learn that love is not earned through perfection, that disagreement is not a threat but a doorway to deeper intimacy, that your no is just as sacred as your yes. And this is terrifying because every cell in your nervous system has been trained to equate self-expression with danger, with rejection, with being too much. But you are not too much. You were simply taught to be less. And now, as an adult, your task is not to become more, but to remember all that you already are, beneath the masks, beneath the roles. To look in the mirror and see yourself, not the daughter your mother dreamed of, but the woman you were born to be. To reclaim the parts of you that were sent into exile, your rage, your power, your hunger, your grief. Learn, slowly, gently, that you are safe now. You can speak, you can rest, you can say no, you can stop performing. Because the love you truly seek is not outside of you, it is waiting within, behind the silence, beneath the performance, beyond the role. And the moment you step into that love, not the one your mother needed from you, but the one you needed from her, you begin the long, sacred journey home to yourself. Unprocessed grief doesn't vanish. Someone else says grief doesn't vanish. It seeps. It seeps into silence, into posture, into the quiet rituals of ordinary life, the way a mother folds laundry without looking up or sighs before entering a room. It is not loud, not theatrical. It is subtle, almost invisible, like the scent of something burning long before smoke appears. This grief is not always born of great tragedy. Often it is the slow, corrosive loss of self, the life she imagines slipping quietly through the cracks of duty and expectation. A mother may still smile, she may still cook, clean, show up. But beneath the surface of that functionality lies a fatigue deeper than the body, a spiritual weariness, the ache of dreams unspoken, betrayals endured, and longings that found no place to land. This grief does not announce itself. It is rarely spoken aloud. It is absorbed, stored, hidden beneath the roles she plays. The wife, the worker, the caregiver, the one who never asks for much, the one who makes sure everyone else is okay. And yet, within her, perhaps behind her eyes, perhaps in the way she forgets to laugh, there is a presence, a heaviness, an emotional fog. If you were a sensitive child, and many of us were, you noticed. Even if you could not name it, you felt it. You felt the emptiness in the room when she was smiling. You felt the tightness in her body when she was quiet. You noticed how she would zone out, disappear into herself, even as she helped with your homework or packed your school bag. And because children are naturally empathic, not yet armored by logic, but still permeable to the emotional atmosphere around them, you made a silent vow. I will fix this. I will make her happy. I will be what she needs. You became her little helper, her emotional interpreter, the one who tiptoed around her moods, who became good, responsible, intuitive, not because it was your nature, but because you were trying to pull her out of a sadness you couldn't name. You learned to read her face like scripture. You celebrated when she was light. You shrank when she was dark. You blamed yourself when you couldn't make her smile. But here is the truth no child is ever told. It was never your job. You were not meant to be her source of joy, her confidant, her therapist. You were meant to be a child, to play, to express, to explore without fear of causing pain. And yet many of us were never granted that freedom. We were parentified, not always in the physical sense, but emotionally. We became containers for grief that was not ours, because the grief your mother couldn't metabolize, the sorrow she never voiced, the disappointment she buried, did not disappear. It simply transferred into the energy of the home, into the body of the child, into you. And you carried it, not by choice, but by instinct. You carried her loneliness like it was your responsibility. You tried to be the reason she got out of bed. You performed, achieved, made her proud, because that flicker of pride was the only light you saw in her. But this creates a tragic misunderstanding. You begin to equate emotional labor with love. You believe that being loved means being needed. You confuse burnout for belonging. And so, the pattern continues into adulthood. You become the partner who gives too much, the friend who listens but never shares, the worker who says yes to every task, not because you want to, but because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. You head back towards the friend and, hey, we're going to clean up, we're going to get the house ready. If you come back and you ask the friend, we're going to come to your house, we're going to make dinner, we're going to watch TV, you feel there's something imperfect about you, but you feel like you must because it's the only thing that you have going on. And so the pattern kind of afraid someone will fall apart, that their disappointment will feel like your failure. You keep repeating the original dynamic over and over because a part of you still believes if I can just be enough, maybe they will finally be okay. And if they are okay, then I can finally rest. But you never rest because their pain is not yours. And no amount of sacrifice can heal a wound that was never yours to carry. This is where healing begins, not in fixing your mother's story, but in naming it. To say that sadness was hers. That silence belonged to her life, her losses, her grief. It did not begin with me, and I do not have to carry it anymore. I too am in the same boat. I had a kid who did not have a tub on the toilet. And this naming is not rejection, it is recognition. It is the moment when the child inside you is finally released from the impossible role she was assigned. It is the sacred turning point. where you allow yourself to stop performing and start feeling. And when the feelings rise, as they will, you may grieve. You may grieve the childhood you never had, the innocence that was traded for emotional vigilance, the playfulness that was swallowed by the weight of someone else's sorrow. Grief, too, is holy. It is not weakness. It is a sign that the cycle is breaking. You are no longer the container for unspoken pain. You are not responsible for healing your mother's wounds by recreating them in your own life. You are allowed to feel tired of always being the strong one. You are allowed to stop rescuing, stop fixing, stop bending yourself into shapes to keep others from breaking. And slowly, gently, you begin to feel what your body has always known, that love is not a transaction, that your worth is not in your usefulness, that you are not here to be someone's source of light while sitting in the dark yourself. You were born with your own light, your own truth, and even if it was never mirrored back to you, it has always been there. The journey now is not about blaming the past, but reclaiming what was lost in it. How about this? We become light, we become love, and it is not to be denied. Now that's a quote. To say, I see now, I understand where this began, and I choose to end it with me. You were not made to be your mother's protector. You were made to be free, and that freedom begins the moment you return the grief to its rightful place. Not with resentment, but with reverence. Not with bitterness, but with boundaries. It was never yours. You can put it down now. Many people resist healing because they fear it means letting their mother off the hook, that somehow if they begin to soften the edges of their pain, if they dare to speak with compassion rather than rage, they are betraying their younger selves. The child who waited for love, who carried confusion like a second skin, who endured silence when they needed presence. This fear is valid, but it arises from a misunderstanding. Healing does not erase what happened. It does not ask us to pretend that the wound was never there. The wound is there. It asks something much more difficult, to face what happened in its full, raw truth, and then to choose who we become in its aftermath. This is the paradox of healing. It begins with truth, but it ends in choice. You cannot change what was done. You cannot rewrite your mother's story, nor undo the shape her absence, criticism, or control carved into your nervous system. But you can stop letting that shape define your future. You can stop worshiping the wound by organizing your entire life around it. You can stop reenacting the pattern in every relationship, waiting for someone else to finally give you what she couldn't. Forgiveness in this sense is not a pardon. It is not a denial. It is not a performance. It is the gradual, trembling, courageous untangling of a web, the web where her grief and your pain are so tightly woven that you no longer know what belongs to whom. It is the act of saying, with steady eyes, I see where you end and where I begin. That act alone is a kind of revolution, because until you do that, you will continue to live in a trance, believing that your mother's limitations must also be your own. You will walk through life carrying her shame as your inheritance, her fear as your compass, her silence as your guide, but you were never meant to carry what was never yours. Real forgiveness is not an event. It doesn't happen in a single moment, a single conversation, a single tearful realization. It happens in layers, in small, almost imperceptible shifts, in the way you stop apologizing for your boundaries, in the way you begin to trust your voice after years of swallowing it, in the way you stop waiting for her to understand and begin understanding yourself instead. It may sound like this: I see your suffering, but I no longer make it my identity. That is not a rejection. That is a return to the self that was buried beneath the role of caretaker, peacekeeper, or invisible child. I understand your limitations, and I will no longer limit myself because of them. That is not cruelty. That is liberation. It is refusing to live in a cage just because it's familiar. I honor your journey, but I choose my own. That is not abandonment. That is becoming the adult your inner child has been waiting for. Healing is not about creating a perfect relationship with your mother. That may never happen. She may never say the words you needed. She may never admit what you longed for her to acknowledge. She may never change. But healing is not dependent on her. It is not a bargain. It is a reclamation of your power, your agency, your path. And that path begins with a choice to stop waiting. There was a woman named Lena who spent most of her life feeling haunted by absence. Her mother had left when she was 6. There had been no explanation, no goodbye, just an empty chair at the kitchen table and years of unanswered questions. Lena grew up, built a life, even became a mother herself, but inside she was still that child, holding a cup of love she never got to pour, still trying to earn something from someone who had long disappeared. One day, in a quiet act of defiance and devotion, she wrote a letter. It began, "You gave me life, but not love, so I learned to give it to myself." She didn't write with bitterness. She wrote with clarity, with sorrow and strength intertwined. And so, pretty simple song. If you can't, suck up the courage, listen to it, and find it, and mend it. And so, pretty simple song. Today, if you are in pain or suffering with stubbornness or weaknesses or slackness, she wrote it and mend it. And so, pretty simple song. And so, pretty simple song. And so, destiny, love, judgment, and destiny once inside. And she continued, "I grieve what we never had, but I'm no longer waiting." That letter was never sent, but it freed her, not because it changed the past, but because it changed her position in the story. She was no longer the one waiting by the door. She had walked through it. You may not need a letter, but you do need a moment when you stop hoping for a different version of her to appear, a moment when you stop begging for emotional scraps and start feeding yourself, a moment when you recognize that the love you've been chasing was never outside of you. It was the love you were always meant to give to yourself. This does not mean you stop loving your mother. It means you stop needing her to be anything other than what she is. It means you step out of the cycle. You take your hands off the steering wheel of a car that's long been out of your control. You turn toward yourself, toward the child inside who still asks, "Why wasn't I enough?" And you answer her, not with explanations, but with presence. You hold her. You see her. You mother her in all the ways you wished you had been mothered. And slowly, you become whole. Not because you healed the relationship with your mother, but because you restored the most sacred relationship of all, the one with yourself. That is the hidden purpose of pain, not to make you bitter, but to bring you back, not to punish, but to awaken, not to destroy, but to reveal. And so the final task is not forgetting. It is remembering who you were before the wound, before you became who she needed you to be, before you inherited her fears and called them yours, before you confused survival with love. The past remains, the scars remain, but they no longer define you. Because healing is not the erasure of history, it is the reclaiming of your future.